There are moments in life when everything you believe to be solid reality crumbles like a sandcastle hit by an unexpected wave. That Thursday afternoon in March, around 5:30 in the evening, Vivian Donovan discovered that her 15-year marriage was built on lies, and that her friendly neighbor was, in truth, her worst enemy. But this story didn't begin that afternoon. It began 3 months earlier, on a sunny Saturday morning when everything still seemed perfect. Vivian was 39 years old, a school supervisor at a prestigious private institution in the suburbs. She had the kind of life many women dream of: a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, a stable marriage to Marvin Donovan, a 43-year-old successful physical therapist who owned his own clinic. They had been together for 15 years, and although they didn't have children yet, they had plans to start trying the following year. Their life was predictable but comfortable, a life where Vivian felt safe, loved, respected, a life where she never questioned whether her husband would come home, whether smiles she received were genuine, whether the foundation beneath her feet was as solid as it appeared. That Saturday morning in early December, Vivian was in the kitchen preparing fresh coffee when she heard the doorbell ring. It was 9 o'clock, and Marvin had left early to play basketball with friends, as he did every Saturday morning. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door with curiosity. When she opened it, she found a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with an easy smile and bright eyes. She was attractive in that effortless way some people are, wearing casual jeans and a light sweater that somehow looked elegant on her. "Hi, I'm so sorry to bother you so early," the young woman said with infectious enthusiasm. "I'm Brianna Sanchez. I just moved into the house next door, the blue one with the white fence. I wanted to come by and introduce myself to the neighbors." Vivian felt an immediate warmth toward the girl. There was something refreshing about someone who still believed in the old tradition of introducing themselves in person, rather than just waving from a distance. "Oh, how wonderful! Please, come in. I'm Vivian Donovan. It's so nice to meet you, Brianna." Brianna stepped inside, looking around with genuine appreciation. "Your house is beautiful. I love how you've decorated. That painting over the fireplace is stunning." "Thank you so much," Vivian replied, leading her to the kitchen. "I was just making coffee. Would you like a cup? I also have some homemade cinnamon rolls I baked this morning." "That sounds absolutely perfect," Brianna said, sitting at the kitchen island. "You're so kind. I have to admit, I was a bit nervous about moving to a new neighborhood, but everyone seems so friendly here." As Vivian poured 2 cups of coffee, she felt genuinely happy to have a new neighbor who seemed so pleasant. The house next door had been empty for almost 6 months, and it was nice to know someone friendly would be living there. "This is a very quiet neighborhood," Vivian said, placing the cup in front of Brianna. "Mostly families, some retirees, very peaceful. Are you living there alone?" "Oh, no," Brianna replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "I'm with my partner, Noel. Well, he's not here right now. He's a sales representative and travels a lot for work. He's usually away for 2 weeks at a time, sometimes longer. He just left yesterday for a 3-week trip to the West Coast." "That must be hard," Vivian said sympathetically, sitting across from her. "Being alone so much." "It can be," Brianna admitted, with a slight sadness in her eyes. "But we've been together for 5 years now. You get used to it, I suppose. What about you? Are you married?" "Yes, for 15 years. My husband Marvin is a physical therapist. He owns a clinic downtown. He's playing basketball with friends right now, but he should be back soon." They talked for about 20 minutes, discussing the neighborhood, the best grocery stores nearby, the parks, the local coffee shops. Vivian found herself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Brianna seemed sweet, a bit lonely perhaps, but warm and engaging. When Vivian got up to refill their coffee cups, she heard the front door open. "Honey, I'm home," Marvin's voice called from the hallway. "In the kitchen," Vivian called back. "We have a visitor." Marvin walked into the kitchen, still in his basketball clothes, a light sheen of sweat on his forehead, his dark hair slightly damp. He was an attractive man, Vivian had always known that, tall and athletic, with an easy smile that had first attracted her to him 15 years ago. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know we had company," he said, slightly embarrassed by his appearance. "This is Brianna Sanchez," Vivian explained, returning with the coffee pot. She just moved into the house next door and came by to introduce herself. "Brianna, this is my husband, Marvin." Vivian was pouring coffee when it happened. She looked up just as Marvin extended his hand to shake Brianna's, and in that split second, she saw something that made every alarm in her body go off. The way Brianna looked at Marvin. It wasn't just a friendly smile or a polite acknowledgement. It was a look Vivian recognized immediately, a look of interest, of attraction, of possibility. Brianna's eyes lingered just a fraction of a second too long. Her smile brightened just a bit too much. Her body language shifted almost imperceptibly toward him. A woman knows. A woman always knows when she sees a threat. Vivian stood frozen for a moment, the coffee pot still in her hand, watching the interaction. Marvin, to his credit, seemed completely oblivious. He shook Brianna's hand with his usual friendly demeanor, said something polite about welcoming her to the neighborhood, and then excused himself to take a shower. Brianna's eyes followed him as he left the kitchen, and Vivian felt a chill run down her spine, despite the warm kitchen. They finished their coffee quickly after that. The easy conversation from before seemed somehow strained now, at least from Vivian's perspective. Brianna thanked her profusely for the hospitality and left about 10 minutes later, promising to have Vivian over once she got the house properly set up. As Vivian closed the door behind her new neighbor, she stood in the hallway for a long moment, her hand still on the doorknob. She was being ridiculous, she told herself. It was just a look. Brianna was young and probably looked at lots of men that way. It meant nothing. Marvin had been a perfect husband for 15 years. He was attentive, loving, respectful. He had never given her a single reason to doubt him. Not once in all their years together had she ever questioned his fidelity. But that look, that damn look. Vivian shook her head, trying to clear the thought. She was overthinking this. She had to be. Marvin came downstairs 20 minutes later, freshly showered and dressed in comfortable weekend clothes. "She seems nice," he commented casually, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "The new neighbor." "Yes," Vivian replied, watching his face carefully for any sign, any hint of anything unusual. "She does. It'll be good to have someone living in that house again," Marvin continued, taking a bite of the apple. "It's been empty for too long. Makes the whole street feel a bit abandoned." He seemed completely normal. There was no nervousness, no unusual interest, no hidden meaning in his words. He was just Marvin, her Marvin, the same man she'd known for 15 years. Vivian felt a wave of guilt wash over her. What was she thinking? She was being paranoid over nothing, letting a moment of female insecurity cloud her judgment. The weeks that followed were peaceful. Vivian saw Brianna occasionally, waving from their respective yards, exchanging pleasantries when they happened to be getting mail at the same time. Marvin never mentioned her, never asked about her, seemed completely uninterested in their new neighbor. Vivian began to relax, to feel foolish about her initial reaction. It had been nothing, just her imagination playing tricks on her. But then came the Tuesday that changed everything. It was late January, about 6 weeks after Brianna had moved in. Vivian had left work early, around 3:30 in the afternoon. She'd been dealing with a terrible headache all day, one of those migraines that feels like a vice slowly tightening around your skull, and her principal had insisted she go home and rest. As she drove down their quiet street, she noticed from a distance someone leaving her house. Her house. She slowed the car, her heart beginning to pound. As she got closer, she could see more clearly. It was Brianna, walking quickly from Vivian's front door toward her own house next door. She was looking around nervously, almost furtively, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Vivian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What was Brianna doing at her house? Why was she leaving in such a hurry? Vivian's mind immediately jumped to the worst possible scenario. No, she told herself firmly. Don't jump to conclusions. There could be a perfectly innocent explanation. Maybe she needed to borrow something. Maybe she had mail delivered to the wrong house. Maybe she needed help with something, and Marvin was just being neighborly. But why did Brianna look so nervous? Why was she practically running back to her own house? Vivian parked in the driveway and sat in her car for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. She looked at the front door of her house. It was closed. Everything looked normal. Marvin's car was in the garage. He always came home for lunch on Tuesdays, since his afternoon schedule was light. Maybe she should just go inside and ask him. Maybe there was a simple explanation and she was, once again, being paranoid over nothing. She took a deep breath, grabbed her bag, and went inside. The house was quiet. "Marvin," she called out. "Upstairs, honey." His voice came from their bedroom. "Give me just a minute." Vivian set her bag down and waited in the living room. A few minutes later, Marvin came down looking perfectly normal in his work clothes, the polo shirt with his clinic's logo and khaki pants. "Hey, you're home early," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Everything okay?" "Bad headache," Vivian replied, studying his face. "My principal sent me home." "Poor thing," he said sympathetically. "Want me to get you some medicine?" "I took some already," she said, then added carefully, "I saw Brianna leaving our house when I pulled up." "Was she here?" She watched his face closely. There it was, just for a split second, a flash of something. Surprise? Nervousness? It was so quick she almost missed it. Then his face relaxed into a casual smile. "Oh, yeah," he said, his tone light and unconcerned. "She knocked on the door about 20 minutes ago, said she was making dinner and realized she'd run out of salt, asked if she could borrow some. No big deal." Vivian felt her stomach tighten. "Why didn't you mention it?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. Marvin shrugged. "It literally just happened. And honestly, it was so insignificant I probably would have forgotten about it. She needed salt. I gave her salt. Not exactly headline news, you know?" He was smiling, acting completely normal, but something felt off to Vivian. After 15 years of marriage, she knew her husband. She knew his tells, his mannerisms, the subtle shifts in his behavior. And right now, despite his casual demeanor, something felt wrong. That night, as they were getting ready for bed, Vivian brought it up again. "Marvin," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of their bed, "about earlier, with Brianna coming over." He looked up from his phone, his expression patient. "What about it? I think you should tell me when things like that happen. When the neighbor comes over while I'm not home." Marvin set his phone down, his expression shifting to something between confused and slightly annoyed. "Vivian, it was salt. She borrowed salt. What exactly should I have told you? That our neighbor, who you seemed to really like when you first met her, came over to borrow a basic kitchen staple? It's just that she said her partner is away for weeks at a time." Vivian continued, trying to articulate the unease she felt. "And I think it's important that we're open about these things. What if the situation was reversed? What if you came home and saw some man leaving our house, and I didn't mention it to you?" Marvin laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. It was the kind of laugh someone makes when they think someone else is overreacting. "Honey, come on. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. I was being neighborly. She needed salt. I had salt. That's literally the extent of it. But don't you think you should have at least mentioned it?" Vivian pressed. "We've always been open with each other about everything." "Okay, fine," Marvin said, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "Next time a neighbor needs to borrow something, I'll text you immediately with a full report. Will that make you happy?" The sarcasm stung. Vivian looked down at her hands. "I'm not trying to be difficult," she said quietly. "I just think communication is important. And I think you're reading way too much into an innocent interaction." Marvin countered. Then his voice softened slightly. Look, I get it. She's young and attractive, and her partner is away a lot. But honey, you have nothing to worry about. I love you. I've loved you for 15 years. Some neighbor borrowing salt isn't going to change that. Vivian wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe him. You're right, she finally said. I'm sorry. I guess I'm just tired and the headache is making me emotional. Come here, Marvin said, pulling her into an embrace. I love you, Vivian Donovan. Only you. Always have. Always will. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. It was steady, calm, the heartbeat of a man with nothing to hide. She was being paranoid. She had to be. Marvin had always been transparent with her. This was the first time in 15 years that he'd failed to mention something. And it really was something small. Maybe she was the one with the problem. Maybe she was letting her own insecurities about getting older, about the attractive young woman next door, cloud her judgment. But as they turned off the lights and settled into bed that night, Vivian couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That feeling women get, that instinct, that voice in the back of their mind that whispers warnings even when everything appears normal on the surface. That female intuition that has saved countless women throughout history from trusting the wrong person at the wrong time. Vivian had always trusted her husband completely. She'd never checked his phone, never questioned his whereabouts, never doubted him for even a moment. But now, lying in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing beside her, she couldn't stop that little voice in her head. Something wasn't right. And deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge yet, Vivian knew that her life as she knew it was about to change forever. The following week passed in a haze of normalcy that somehow felt wrong. Marvin went to work every day, came home at his usual times, kissed Vivian hello and goodbye, and behaved exactly as he always had. Yet that small seed of doubt, planted on the day Vivian saw Brianna leaving their house, had taken root in her mind and refused to die. On Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the salt incident, Vivian left work early again. This time it wasn't a headache. It was a staff meeting that had been unexpectedly canceled. She texted Marvin to let him know she'd be home by 3 o'clock instead of her usual 5:30. But he didn't respond immediately. He was probably with a patient, she thought. He often couldn't check his phone during sessions. As Vivian turned onto their street, her heart nearly stopped. There, walking quickly down her front steps, was Brianna. Again. The young woman glanced around nervously before hurrying back to her own house, just as she had the week before. This time, there was no mistaking it. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. Vivian's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. She didn't pull into the driveway immediately. Instead, she parked a few houses down, her mind racing. Brianna hadn't seen her. Neither had Marvin, presumably. What should she do? Should she confront them both right now? Should she wait and see if Marvin would mention it this time? After sitting in her car for nearly 10 minutes, Vivian decided to wait. She wanted to give Marvin the chance to be honest with her. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still an innocent explanation. She drove home, parked in the driveway, and walked inside with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Marvin," she called out. "In here!" His voice came from the living room this time. He was sitting on the couch, reading something on his tablet, looking completely relaxed. He smiled when he saw her. "Hey, you're home early. How was your day?" Vivian stood in the doorway, watching him. He looked so normal, so innocent, so much like the man she'd known and loved for 15 years. "The meeting got canceled," she said carefully. "So I came home." "Well, that's nice," Marvin said, setting down his tablet. "Want to order dinner tonight instead of cooking? We could get that Thai food you love." She waited. She waited for him to mention that Brianna had come by. She waited for him to say something, anything, about their neighbor visiting while Vivian was at work. But he said nothing. He just sat there, smiling at her, suggesting dinner options as if this was just another ordinary day. "Actually," Vivian said, her voice tight, "I'm not very hungry. I think I'll just go take a bath." "You okay?" Marvin asked, concern crossing his face. "You seem tense." "Just tired," she lied, and went upstairs before he could see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. In their bedroom, Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning. He hadn't mentioned it. Brianna had been at their house again, and Marvin hadn't said a single word. Why? What possible reason could he have for keeping it from her, especially after their conversation last week about communication and transparency? That night at dinner, which they eventually ordered as Marvin had suggested, Vivian waited. She waited through the entire meal for him to bring it up, but he never did. He talked about his day at the clinic, about a patient who'd made remarkable progress, about needing to order new equipment. He talked about everything except the fact that their young, attractive neighbor had been in their house while Vivian was at work. As they cleaned up after dinner, Vivian felt something inside her crack. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't her imagination. This was real. Her husband was deliberately keeping something from her, and she needed to know what it was. But this time, she didn't confront him, because she realized something important. If she asked him about it, he would just come up with another explanation, another excuse, another reason why it was innocent, and she was overreacting. And she would want so desperately to believe him that she probably would. No, this time she needed proof. This time she needed to know for certain what was really happening in her own home while she was at work. The next morning, Friday, Vivian called in sick to work. It was the first time she'd done so in over 2 years. She told them she had a stomach bug and needed to rest. Marvin left for the clinic at his usual time, 7:30 in the morning, kissing her goodbye and telling her to feel better. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, Vivian got dressed and left the house. She drove to an electronics store on the other side of town, somewhere far enough away that she wouldn't run into anyone she knew. Her hands were shaking as she walked down the aisles, looking for what she needed. Finally, she found it. A package of 3 small wireless security cameras. They were marketed as easy-to-install home monitoring devices, perfect for keeping an eye on your property when you weren't there. The box promised they could be controlled via smartphone app, recorded continuously, and were virtually invisible when properly placed. Vivian paid cash, something that felt ridiculous and dramatic even as she did it, like she was in some kind of spy movie. She felt sick to her stomach as she drove home. What was she doing? Was she really going to spy on her own husband in their own home? What kind of wife does that? But then she remembered the look on Brianna's face when she'd first met Marvin. She remembered seeing Brianna leave their house not once, but twice. She remembered Marvin's failure to mention either visit, and she knew she had no choice. She needed to know the truth, whatever it might be. Back at home, Vivian carefully installed 2 of the cameras. One in the living room, hidden on a high bookshelf behind some decorative items. One in the kitchen, tucked into the corner near the ceiling, where it blended in with the white walls. She downloaded the app to her phone, tested both cameras to make sure they worked, and then tried to steady her breathing. She felt guilty. She felt like she was violating Marvin's privacy, betraying his trust. But wasn't he the one who had betrayed hers first? Wasn't he the one keeping secrets? For the next 2 weeks, Vivian watched. Every day at work, during her lunch break, and any spare moments she had, she would check the camera feeds on her phone. And every day, she saw nothing. Marvin came home for lunch sometimes, as he always had. He would make a sandwich, watch part of a basketball game, and go back to work. No Brianna. No suspicious behavior. Nothing. Vivian began to feel foolish. She had installed spy cameras in her own home to catch her husband doing something he clearly wasn't doing. She had let her imagination run wild, had let one moment of intuition override 15 years of trust and love. She was ashamed of herself, By the third week, Vivian had almost convinced herself to remove the cameras. She even opened the app one evening, planning to delete everything and pretend this paranoid episode had never happened. But something stopped her. That same little voice, that same instinct that had warned her from the beginning, told her to wait just a bit longer. On a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after installing the cameras, Vivian was in a faculty meeting when her phone buzzed with a motion alert from the home monitoring app. Her heart jumped. She tried to focus on the meeting, but 5 minutes later, during a break, she couldn't resist checking. She opened the app, selected the kitchen camera, and there it was, Brianna, entering through the front door. Vivian's pulse raced. This was it. This was the moment she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She watched, barely breathing, as Brianna walked into the kitchen. Marvin appeared moments later. Vivian's hands shook as she held the phone, watching her husband and their neighbor in her kitchen. But then, something unexpected happened. Brianna reached into a shopping bag she was carrying and pulled out 2 packages, salt and flour. She handed them to Marvin. He took them, set them on the counter, and then poured her a cup of coffee from the pot that was already made. They sat down at the kitchen table together. Vivian watched, transfixed. They were just sitting there, drinking coffee, talking. The cameras didn't have audio, so she couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language seemed normal, casual. After about 5 minutes, Brianna stood up, smiled, said something that made Marvin laugh, and left. That was it. That was all it was. She'd borrowed salt and flour, and now she was returning them with a friendly cup of coffee. Nothing inappropriate, nothing suspicious, just neighbors being neighborly. Vivian felt like she'd been doused with cold water. She'd been so certain, so absolutely convinced that something terrible was happening. But the evidence right in front of her eyes showed nothing but an innocent interaction. She replayed the footage 3 more times during the meeting, looking for anything, any gesture or glance or moment that seemed inappropriate, but there was nothing. That evening, Vivian waited to see if Marvin would mention it. They ate dinner together, watched a show on television, got ready for bed. He never said a word about Brianna's visit, and that, more than anything else, kept that small flame of doubt alive in Vivian's mind. Why wouldn't he mention it? Even if it was innocent, even if it was just a neighbor returning borrowed items, why keep it from her? Especially after their previous conversations about communication and transparency. Was he trying to avoid another argument? Was he trying to protect her from her own paranoia? Or was there something else going on? Vivian lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Marvin slept peacefully beside her. She replayed everything in her mind. The look Brianna had given Marvin when they first met. The 2 times she'd seen Brianna leaving their house. Marvin's failure to mention any of these visits. The video footage of them having coffee together. Individually, each incident seemed innocent enough, but together they formed a pattern that Vivian couldn't ignore. Her intuition was screaming at her that something was wrong, even though the evidence suggested otherwise. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was being paranoid and jealous and irrational. Maybe Marvin was right, and she was making mountains out of molehills. Maybe that's exactly what was happening, and she needed to let it go before she destroyed her marriage over nothing. But as Vivian finally drifted off to sleep in the early hours of the morning, one thought kept circling through her exhausted mind. Female intuition never fails, and hers was telling her that she hadn't seen the whole truth yet. She just needed to keep looking. The next day, Vivian could barely focus at work. She'd slept maybe 3 hours, her mind churning through the same questions over and over again. During her lunch break, she sat in her car and stared at her phone, debating whether to check the camera feeds. Part of her wanted to delete the app entirely, to stop this cycle of suspicion and surveillance. But another part of her, the part that couldn't shake that persistent feeling of wrongness, needed to know the truth. She decided she would give it 1 more day, just 1 more day of monitoring. And if nothing happened, She would remove the cameras and work on trusting her husband again. Maybe she would even suggest marriage counseling, not because of anything he'd done, but because of her own inability to let go of this paranoia. That afternoon, as Vivian drove home from work, she made her decision. Tonight, she would tell Marvin about the cameras. She would confess everything, apologize for not trusting him, and they would work through this together, like the strong couple they'd always been. She felt a sense of relief wash over her as she pulled into the driveway. This nightmare of suspicion would finally be over. But when she opened the front door, that relief evaporated instantly. Marvin was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for her, and in front of him, placed deliberately in the center of the table, was one of her hidden cameras. Vivian's heart plummeted to her stomach. She stood frozen in the doorway, her bag slipping from her shoulder to the floor. Marvin looked up at her, his face unreadable. Not angry, exactly, but not friendly either. "Welcome home," he said quietly. "I think we need to talk." Vivian's mouth went dry. She couldn't find words. How had he found it? When? What was he thinking? "Please sit down," Marvin said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice was eerily calm, which somehow made everything worse. Vivian's legs felt like they might give out as she walked to the table and sat down. She stared at the camera between them like it was a bomb about to explode. "So," Marvin said, leaning back in his chair, "this is interesting. Can you explain to me what this is doing hidden in our home?" "I can explain," Vivian started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please do," Marvin interrupted, his calm facade beginning to crack. "Please explain to me why my wife, my partner of 15 years, the woman I love and trust completely, has been secretly recording our home. Recording me." "Marvin, I'm sorry. You just what?" His voice was rising now. "You just decided to spy on me? You just decided that 15 years of trust and loyalty meant nothing?" "It's not like that," Vivian said, feeling tears begin to well up in her eyes. 2 weeks ago, I came home early, and I saw Brianna leaving our house again." Marvin's expression shifted to something between disbelief and frustration. "Oh, here we go again. Everything is about Brianna. Everything is about the neighbor." "You didn't tell me she came over," Vivian said, her own voice rising now. "Again! She came over again and you didn't say anything." "Because I knew this would happen," Marvin shouted, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I knew you would overreact. I knew you would turn an innocent neighborly interaction into some kind of conspiracy." "Then why hide it?" Vivian demanded, standing up as well. "If it was so innocent, why not just tell me? We've always told each other everything. To avoid exactly this," Marvin gestured wildly at the camera. "To avoid you installing surveillance equipment in our own home like I'm some kind of criminal. Do you understand how violated I feel right now? How completely insane this is?" Vivian felt her resolve beginning to crumble. He was right. What she'd done was extreme, but she pressed on. "She's been here multiple times, Marvin. I've seen her leaving our house. Why does she keep coming over when I'm not here?" Marvin took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. He sat back down and put his head in his hands for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "Fine. You want to know? The first time she needed salt. You already know that. The second time, she needed to borrow flour. She was baking something for a work event. Yesterday, she came to return both items, and I offered her a cup of coffee, because that's what normal, polite neighbors do. That's it. That's the entire story. There's no affair, no secret relationship, no conspiracy. Just a neighbor borrowing basic kitchen staples." "But why didn't you tell me?" Vivian asked, her voice breaking. "That's all I needed. Just for you to tell me. Because you made such a big deal out of it the first time," Marvin said, his frustration evident. "You questioned me. You made me feel guilty for being polite to a neighbor. So I thought, you know what? I'll just not mention it and avoid the drama. Clearly, that was the wrong choice." He paused, then continued, his voice getting softer, but somehow more cutting. But let's talk about what you did, Vivian. You installed hidden cameras in our home. In our home. You spied on me for weeks. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? How much that betrays everything we've built together? Guilt crashed over Vivian like a wave. She sat down heavily, suddenly feeling exhausted. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I saw the way she looked at you that first day, and then she kept coming over when I wasn't home, and you kept not telling me. I needed to know." "Know what?" Marvin asked, and now there was genuine hurt in his voice. "What exactly did you think you were going to catch me doing? Having an affair? With our neighbor? In our own home?" When he put it like that, it did sound absurd. Vivian covered her face with her hands. I don't know what I was thinking. I just had this feeling that something was wrong." "A feeling," Marvin repeated bitterly. He stood up and grabbed the camera from the table. "I'm throwing this away, and if there are others, I want them gone too. All of them." "There's one more," Vivian admitted quietly. "In the living room." Marvin shook his head in disbelief and walked toward the living room. Vivian heard him searching, heard him curse under his breath, and then heard the sound of something being thrown into the trash can in the kitchen. He came back and stood in the doorway, looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before. It wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite sadness. It was disappointment, deep, profound disappointment. "I have always been faithful to you," he said quietly. "Always. In 15 years, I have never once looked at another woman the way I look at you. I have never once considered straying. I work hard to provide for us. I come home to you every night. I tell you, I love you every single day. And somehow, that's still not enough. Somehow, you still can't trust me." "Marvin," Vivian started, but he held up his hand. "I need some space," he said. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. Maybe for a few nights. I need to think about this." "Please," Vivian said, tears streaming down her face now. "Please don't. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I'll do anything to fix this." "You made me feel like a stranger in my own home," Marvin said, his voice breaking slightly. "You made me feel like you don't even know who I am after 15 years together. So many men out there cheat, lie, abandon their families, and you have me. You have someone who has been nothing but devoted to you. But it's never enough, is it?" He walked past her to the stairs, pausing only to add, "Maybe I was the one who chose wrong." Those words hit Vivian like a physical blow. She watched him climb the stairs, heard him gather some clothes from their bedroom, heard the guest room door close with a devastating finality. Vivian sat alone at the kitchen table, crying harder than she could remember crying in years. What had she done? Marvin was right about everything. He had been an excellent husband, faithful, loving, supportive, and she'd repaid that devotion with suspicion and surveillance. She'd let one moment of intuition, one look from a neighbor, poison 15 years of trust. Maybe she really was going crazy. Maybe her intuition had been wrong this time. Maybe she'd just destroyed the best thing in her life over absolutely nothing. That night was the longest of Vivian's life. She lay alone in their bed, the bed they'd shared for 15 years, and questioned everything. She thought about going to the guest room, about apologizing again, about begging him to come back, but she knew he needed space. She'd violated his trust, his privacy, his sense of safety in his own home. The least she could do was respect his need for distance. The next few days were torture. They barely spoke. In the mornings, they moved around the house like ghosts, preparing for work in silence. Marvin took his coffee in the guest room instead of sharing it with her in the kitchen as they'd done every morning for years. They ate dinner in silence when they ate together at all. At night, Vivian lay alone, listening to the sounds of Marvin in the other room, so close and yet impossibly far away. By Saturday, Vivian knew she had to do something. She couldn't let her marriage fall apart without fighting for it. She decided she would make a special dinner that evening, Marvin's favorite meal. She would apologize properly, tell him how much he meant to her, promise to work on her trust issues, maybe even suggest they see a counselor together. She would make this right, whatever it took. Marvin left early that morning to work at the clinic. He often had a few appointments on Saturday mornings. Vivian decided to spend the day deep cleaning the house, both as a way to keep busy and as a gesture toward rebuilding their life together. She would make everything perfect. She would show him that she was committed to fixing what she'd broken. She started upstairs, working her way through each room systematically. When she got to the guest room, the one Marvin had been sleeping in, she stripped the bed to wash the sheets. She dusted the furniture, cleaned the windows, and that's when she saw it. On the windowsill, there was a mark, a smudge, almost like dirt or dust, but with a distinctive pattern. Vivian leaned closer, her heart beginning to beat faster. It was a shoe print, a partial shoe print, as if someone had stepped on the windowsill. Vivian's mind raced. Why would there be a shoe print on the inside of a second-floor window? They never used this room. It was supposed to be locked most of the time because they didn't need it. So why was there a fresh-looking shoe print on the windowsill? She looked out the window. It faced the backyard, and from this angle, she could see the house next door, Brianna's house. And between the two properties was the wooden fence that separated their yards. No, Vivian thought. No, she was done with this. She was done seeing conspiracy where there was none. It was probably just from when they'd had the windows cleaned last month, or from when Marvin had opened the window for fresh air. There was a logical explanation. There had to be. But even as she tried to convince herself, that nagging voice in her head grew louder. Female intuition. That persistent, infuriating instinct that wouldn't let her rest. She pulled out her phone, suddenly remembering something. The cameras. Marvin had thrown away the physical cameras, but the app was still on her phone. And the cameras had been recording to the cloud for 3 weeks. Even though the cameras were gone, the footage they'd captured should still be stored in the app. Vivian's hands shook as she opened the app. She'd promised herself she was done with this. She'd been so ashamed of herself for spying on her husband. But now, standing in this guest room, looking at that shoe print, she couldn't stop herself. She scrolled through the stored footage from the past 3 weeks. Most of it was mundane. Marvin coming and going, exactly as he'd always done. Making lunch, watching television, reading on the couch. Nothing suspicious, nothing unusual. But then, Vivian noticed something. A pattern in the timestamps. Every day, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Marvin would walk toward the guest room, and then he would disappear from the camera's view for about 30 minutes. The cameras were positioned in the living room and kitchen, so they didn't capture the hallway or stairs clearly. But she could see him walking in that direction, and then nothing until he reappeared half an hour later. Why would Marvin spend 30 minutes every day in an empty, unused guest room? Vivian sat down on the bed, her heart pounding. There was nothing in this room. It was barely furnished. Just a bed, a small dresser, a nightstand. They kept it made up for the rare occasions when they had overnight guests, which hadn't happened in over a year. There was no television, no computer, nothing that would justify spending 30 minutes in here every single day. She looked at the window again, at the shoe print, at the view of Brianna's house, and suddenly, with a clarity that felt like ice water in her veins, Vivian understood. The phrase Marvin had used during their argument came back to her with devastating precision. "Do you think I would have an affair in our own home? In our own home. Inside our home. But what if he wasn't having an affair inside their home? What if he was leaving their home through this window, going next door, and then coming back the same way? No, that was insane. That was paranoid conspiracy theory thinking. Marvin wouldn't do that. He couldn't do that. But the shoe print, the daily disappearances, the window that faced Brianna's house, the fence that separated their properties, easily jumpable for someone athletic like Marvin. Vivian stood up on shaking legs. She was at a crossroads. She could ignore this, throw away her phone, forget she'd ever seen that shoe print, and focus on saving her marriage. She could choose to believe her husband, to trust the man she'd loved for 15 years. Or she could follow her intuition one more time, even though it had already cost her so much. She went to her bedroom, opened her dresser drawer, and reached to the very back. There, still in its packaging, was the third camera, the one she'd never installed, the one she'd kept as a backup, just in case. Female intuition never fails, she thought, even as part of her screamed that she was making another terrible mistake. She held the small camera in her hand, feeling its weight, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to make. If she was wrong, if she installed this camera and found nothing, she would have proven Marvin right about everything. She would have demonstrated that she was paranoid, distrustful, unable to let go. It would be the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. But if she was right, female intuition never fails, Vivian whispered to herself. She took a deep breath and made her decision. Vivian stood in the guest room, holding that third camera, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Installing it inside would be pointless now. Marvin knew about the cameras. He'd be watching for them. But then a better idea struck her. She went downstairs and out the back door to their small garden. Along the fence line, she had several decorative planters with flowers and small shrubs. She chose the tallest one, a large terracotta pot with a flowering vine that sat on a wooden stand, positioned perfectly to have a view of both the guest room window and Brianna's back door. Working quickly, her hands still trembling, Vivian nestled the tiny camera deep within the foliage, angling it carefully. The vine's leaves provided perfect camouflage while still allowing a clear line of sight. She tested it with her phone. The view was perfect. She could see the guest room window clearly, and beyond the fence, she could see Brianna's back porch and door. Vivian went back inside, her heart pounding so hard she felt lightheaded. What was she doing? If Marvin found out about this, there would be no coming back from it. But something deeper than logic was driving her now. That instinct, that gut feeling that had been screaming at her since the day Brianna first looked at her husband. She forced herself to go through the motions of the day. She continued cleaning, though her mind was elsewhere. She prepared ingredients for the special dinner she'd planned, though her hands shook as she chopped vegetables. Around 12:30, she heard Marvin come home. He called out a brief hello, his voice still distant and cold. She heard him go upstairs. Vivian waited 5 minutes, then pulled out her phone and opened the camera app with trembling fingers. She switched to the live feed from the garden camera. At first, she saw nothing, just the empty view of the guest room window and the fence beyond. Then, at exactly 1:15, she saw movement. The guest room window opened, and Marvin climbed out onto the small roof overhang beneath it. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She watched, unable to breathe, as her husband of 15 years carefully made his way to the edge of the overhang and jumped down to the fence. He looked around cautiously, checking to see if anyone was watching, and then scaled the fence with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. On the other side, in Brianna's backyard, he dropped down and walked quickly to her back door. It opened before he even knocked. Brianna appeared, wearing a short robe. She smiled at him. And then Marvin pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, a real kiss, a lover's kiss. The world tilted. Vivian actually had to sit down on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, staring at the phone screen. All the air had left her lungs. All the strength had left her body. She watched them disappear into Brianna's house, the door closing behind them. She had been right. All along she had been right. The validation felt nothing like she'd imagined. There was no satisfaction, no sense of vindication, only a crushing, devastating pain that radiated from her chest outward, making her entire body feel like it was breaking apart. Vivian sat on the cold kitchen floor, and for the first 5 minutes, she couldn't even cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. This was the man who had held her when her father died, the man who had promised to love her until death, the man who had looked her in the eyes just days ago and made her feel crazy for suspecting him, the man who had told her she was paranoid, that she was destroying their marriage with her baseless accusations. But then, something else began to rise through the pain, something hot and fierce and clarifying. Rage. Pure, justified rage. She thought about the past week, about how he'd made her grovel and apologize, about how he'd called her paranoid and crazy, about how he'd made her question her own sanity, her own instincts, her own worth, about how he'd slept in the guest room, playing the victim, making her feel guilty for not trusting him, all while he was jumping out that very same guest room window every afternoon to sleep with their neighbor. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the calculated cruelty of making her doubt herself when she'd been right all along. Every word he'd said during their argument replayed in her mind, but now she heard them differently. The lies weren't just about covering up an affair. They were about making her feel like she was the problem, making her feel unstable, making her question her own perception of reality. You're crazy. You're paranoid. You're destroying our marriage. When all along, he was the one destroying everything they'd built. Vivian slowly got to her feet. The tears had started now, hot and angry, streaming down her face. But she wasn't crying from sadness anymore. She was crying from fury, from betrayal, from the sheer audacity of what he'd done to her. She paid the cafe quickly and walked out to the parking lot. In her car, alone, the facade she'd been holding crumbled completely. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside, violent and raw. She hit the steering wheel once, twice, 3 times, not even feeling the pain in her hands. "I knew," she sobbed. "I always knew. And he made me think I was losing my mind." Every moment of doubt she'd had about herself, every time she'd questioned her intuition, every apology she'd made for not trusting him, it all came crashing back now, and the weight of it was unbearable. "You're paranoid. You're making mountains out of molehills. You're choosing wrong." His voice echoed in her memory, and she wanted to scream. She had been right about everything. From that very first look Brianna gave him, she had known something was wrong, but he'd twisted it, manipulated it, made her feel like her instincts were flaws rather than warnings. She cried for 5 full minutes in that parking lot, allowing herself to feel everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, the grief for the marriage she'd thought she had, for the man she'd thought Marvin was. But then, slowly, something shifted. As she sat there, mascara running down her face, hands aching from hitting the steering wheel, something cold and clear settled over her. The tears stopped. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something different in them now. Something harder, stronger. "Never again," she whispered to her reflection. "Never again will I doubt myself because of a liar." The woman looking back at her wasn't the same woman who had installed those cameras weeks ago, full of guilt and self-doubt. That woman had died in this parking lot. In her place was someone who knew, with absolute certainty, that her intuition had been trying to protect her all along. She took out her phone and sent Marvin a text. "Something came up at work. I'll be home around 6. Our special dinner is still on." He responded almost immediately. "Okay, honey." Honey! He called her honey while he was in another woman's house. The audacity was almost impressive. Vivian started the car, but she didn't drive home. She drove to her office, even though it was Saturday, and the building would be mostly empty. She went to her desk, turned on her computer, and opened the camera footage on the larger screen. She found the exact moment when Marvin kissed Brianna. She took a screenshot, then another, then another. She made sure the timestamp was visible in each one. Clear, Undeniable proof. She printed the clearest image in color. The photo came out perfectly. Marvin's face was clearly visible. Brianna's face was clearly visible. The kiss was clearly visible. There was no way he could deny this. No way he could twist it, explain it away, make her feel crazy for believing what she was seeing. She folded the photo carefully and put it in her purse. Then she drove to a grocery store and bought one thing: a bunch of bananas. As Vivian drove home, a strange calm settled over her. She thought about what she was about to do, and for the first time in weeks, she felt absolutely certain. No doubt, no second-guessing, just clarity. She thought about Marvin, probably back in their home now, probably showering off the evidence of his betrayal, probably preparing to sit across from her at dinner and pretend to be the wounded party, probably planning to make her feel guilty for not trusting him, all while he'd been doing exactly what she'd suspected. When she got home at 5:45, Marvin was in the living room. He looked up when she entered, his expression still cool and distant. "You're home," he said. "I am," Vivian replied, her voice steady. "I'm going to take a quick shower and then I'll start dinner." "Okay," he said, turning back to his tablet. Vivian went upstairs. In their bedroom, she quickly and quietly gathered Marvin's clothes from the closet and dresser and packed them into 2 large suitcases. She put the suitcases in the guest room and closed the door. Then she took a shower, letting the hot water wash away the dried tears, the smudged makeup, the physical evidence of her breakdown in the parking lot. When she came downstairs 30 minutes later, wearing comfortable clothes and with her hair still damp, she felt completely calm. She went into the kitchen and took the bananas from the grocery bag. She peeled one, placed it on a plate, and stabbed a knife through it so it stood upright. "Honey," she called out sweetly, "dinner's ready." She heard Marvin get up from the couch, heard his footsteps approaching the kitchen. She set the plate with the banana and knife in the center of the table and sat down, folding her hands in front of her, waiting. Marvin walked in, looking confused by how quickly dinner was ready. He looked at the table, at the plate, at the banana, with the knife stabbed through it. His expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What is this?" he asked slowly. "That's your dinner," Vivian said, her voice eerily calm. "But it's also what I should do to you for being the lying, manipulative piece of garbage that you are." Marvin's face went pale. "Vivian, what are you—" "Sit down," she said, her voice like ice. "I don't understand what's happening right now," Marvin said, but there was something in his voice now. A tremor. Fear. "You had the nerve to look me in the eyes," Vivian continued, her voice getting stronger, "and tell me I was going crazy, that I was paranoid, that I was destroying our marriage with my baseless suspicions. You made me apologize for not trusting you. You slept in the guest room, playing the victim, making me feel guilty." "Vivian, I'm not finished." Her voice cracked like a whip, and Marvin actually flinched. "You want to know something funny? You were right about one thing. You said I would never catch you having an affair inside our house. You were very specific about that. Inside our house. Because you weren't having an affair inside our house, were you, Marvin? You were climbing out the guest room window and going next door." The color completely drained from Marvin's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Oh, what's wrong?" Vivian asked, her tone mocking now. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you trying to figure out which lie to tell me this time? Maybe you'll tell me I edited some video footage? That I'm so obsessed I created fake evidence?" "Vivian, listen, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Vivian shouted, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I saw you. I saw you climb out that window. I saw you jump the fence. I saw you kiss her." Marvin's hands were shaking now. He tried to speak, but she cut him off again. "But you know what the worst part is?" Vivian's voice dropped low. "Dangerous. It's not even the affair. It's what you did to me. You made me doubt my own mind. You made me feel crazy for trusting my instincts. You manipulated me into thinking I was the problem. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To question your own sanity because someone you love keeps telling you that what you're seeing isn't real? I'm sorry, Marvin whispered, and tears were actually forming in his eyes. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. It was a mistake. She means nothing. It was just, don't, Vivian said sharply. Don't you dare try to minimize this. 4 months, Marvin. I know it's been at least 4 months because that's how long those cameras were recording your little disappearing acts. 4 months of lying to my face. 4 months of making me feel insane for suspecting exactly what you were doing. It's not what you think. Really? Vivian reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded photo. She unfolded it slowly and slid it across the table. Then explain this. Explain why you have your tongue down our neighbor's throat, if it's not what I think. Marvin looked at the photo, and whatever color had returned to his face vanished again. His hands trembled as he picked it up. That's right, Vivian said, her voice hard. I have proof. Dated. Time-stamped, crystal-clear proof. So don't insult me by trying to lie your way out of this. Vivian, please, Marvin said, and actual tears were running down his face now. I made a terrible mistake. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Please, don't throw away 15 years. I'm not the one who threw away 15 years, Vivian screamed. You did that. You did that when you decided some 28-year-old was more important than our marriage. You did that when you climbed out a window like a teenager. You did that when you looked me in the eyes and called me crazy. She walked to the refrigerator and grabbed her keys from the hook. Your suitcases are in the guest room. You have until tomorrow at noon to get them and anything else you want from this house. After that, I'm changing the locks. Vivian, please, we can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, Vivian said coldly. Oh, and by the way, that house you've been sneaking into? The one that belongs to your girlfriend? She's not alone. She lives with her partner, remember? Noel? The one who works out of town? Marvin's eyes widened. You didn't? I absolutely did, Vivian said with grim satisfaction. I sent him the photo too, about an hour ago, along with a very detailed message explaining what's been happening. So you might want to knock before you jump that fence next time. Oh my God, Marvin whispered, sinking into a chair. Vivian, you've ruined everything. No, Vivian corrected him sharply. You ruined everything. I just made sure there were consequences. Now get out of my house. Marvin tried once more, reaching for her. Please, honey. If you call me honey one more time, Vivian said, her voice deadly quiet, I will actually use that knife on you. Now, get out. Marvin stood there for a moment longer, looking at her like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe the woman he'd been married to, the woman who had trusted him blindly, who had doubted herself for his sake, was gone. And in her place stood someone who would never let anyone make her question her own reality again. Finally, Marvin turned and walked out of the kitchen. Vivian heard him go upstairs, heard him in the guest room, heard the sound of him dragging suitcases down the stairs. She stayed in the kitchen, standing perfectly still, until she heard the front door open and close. Only then did she move to the window. She watched Marvin load his suitcases into his car. He sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, just sitting there, probably trying to process what had just happened, probably trying to figure out what to do next. Then she heard it, shouting from next door. Loud, angry, male shouting. Vivian moved to the living room window for a better view. Noel's car was in Brianna's driveway. He must have driven straight back when he got her message. The front door of Brianna's house burst open, and Noel came storming out, still wearing what looked like his work clothes, carrying a duffel bag. His face was red with rage. Brianna ran after him, crying, pleading, but he didn't even turn around. He threw the bag in his car, got in, and peeled out of the driveway so fast he left tire marks on the street. Marvin, still sitting in his car in their driveway, watched all of this unfold. Then he looked at Brianna, who was standing in her doorway crying. She looked back at him, and Vivian could almost see the moment when Marvin thought he might go to her, might try to comfort her. But then, Brianna's expression changed, from heartbreak to fury in an instant. She stormed toward Marvin's car and started banging on the window. "This is your fault!" she screamed at him, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening air. "You idiot! How could you let her find out? You've ruined everything. My life is destroyed because of you." Marvin started the car quickly and backed out of the driveway. Brianna followed him, still screaming, "Don't you dare leave! You did this! You're not leaving me to deal with this alone!" But Marvin did leave. He drove away, and Brianna stood in the middle of the street, crying and screaming until one of the other neighbors came out to check on her. Vivian watched it all from her window, and for the first time in months, she smiled. Not a happy smile. A cold, satisfied smile of someone who had just watched justice being served. Female intuition never fails, and a flower pot had proven it. The house felt different that night. Not empty, exactly, but lighter somehow. As if removing Marvin's presence had lifted a weight Vivian hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. She didn't cry. She'd done all her crying in that parking lot earlier. Now, there was only a strange, surreal calm. She sat on the couch with a cup of tea, replaying the evening's events in her mind. The look on Marvin's face when he saw the photo, the desperation in his voice when he tried to explain, the pathetic scene with Brianna screaming at him in the street. Part of her felt like she should feel worse. 15 years of marriage had ended in a single evening. The life she'd built, the future she'd imagined, all of it was gone. But instead of devastation, she felt something unexpected. Relief. For months, she'd been living with that gnawing feeling that something was wrong, that persistent voice telling her to look deeper, to trust herself, to not accept the easy explanations. And for months, she'd fought against that voice. Let Marvin convince her it was paranoia. Let her own fear of losing him override her instincts. But she'd been right. Her intuition had been screaming the truth at her from the very beginning, and she'd finally listened. The next morning, Sunday, Vivian woke up early. She'd slept surprisingly well, better than she had in weeks. She made coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the sunrise. The garden camera was still nestled in its planter, its tiny lens reflecting the morning light. She pulled out her phone and deleted the app, then went outside and retrieved the camera. She'd keep it as a reminder, she decided, not of Marvin's betrayal, but of her own strength, of the moment she'd chosen to trust herself over a liar's gaslighting. Around 10 o'clock, Marvin's car pulled into the driveway. Vivian watched from the kitchen window as he got out slowly, looking exhausted. He'd probably spent the night in a hotel. Good, she thought coldly. She opened the front door before he could knock. "You have 2 hours," she said without preamble. "Take whatever you want that's yours. Leave the house key on the kitchen counter when you're done." "Vivian, can we please talk?" Marvin's eyes were red and swollen. He looked like he'd been crying all night. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, can we just talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about," Vivian said firmly. "You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences. 2 hours, Marvin. Not a minute more." She walked away, leaving him standing in the doorway. She went upstairs to her bedroom, their former bedroom, and closed the door. She could hear him moving around the house, gathering his things, books from his office, clothes from the closet, his basketball equipment from the garage, the sounds of a life being dismantled. Exactly 2 hours later, she heard his car start. She went to the window and watched him drive away, his car packed with boxes and bags. On the kitchen counter, she found his house key, just as she'd instructed. Next to it was a note. "Vivian, I know sorry isn't enough. I know I destroyed everything good in my life. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I loved you. I do love you. I just lost my way. I'll sign whatever papers you need. The house is yours. I won't fight you on anything. I'm so sorry for what I've done to you, to us. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me, even if you can never take me back. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. M. Vivian read the note once, then crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. His words meant nothing now. Love wasn't just words. Love was respect, honesty, faithfulness. Love was not making your partner doubt their own sanity to cover your lies. The following weeks were a blur of logistics. Vivian hired a divorce attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd been through her own divorce and had zero tolerance for cheating husbands. The proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. True to his word, Marvin didn't fight anything. The house was Vivian's, inherited from her grandmother years ago, so there was no question about that. They sold his car and split the proceeds. Within 6 weeks, the divorce was finalized. Vivian threw herself into work, using it as a distraction from the upheaval in her personal life. Her colleagues knew something had happened, but she kept the details vague. Marvin and I are getting divorced. He was unfaithful. I'm doing okay. That was all anyone needed to know. As for Brianna, Vivian watched from her window as a moving truck appeared at the house next door about 2 weeks after that dramatic night. Brianna was moving out. Without Noel's income, she clearly couldn't afford to keep the house. Vivian felt no sympathy. Brianna had known exactly what she was doing when she pursued a married man. She'd looked Vivian in the eye over coffee that very first day, all smiles and friendliness, while already planning to seduce her husband. Through mutual acquaintances, Vivian heard later that Marvin had tried to reach out to Brianna, had tried to make something real out of their affair. But Brianna had rejected him coldly. "You ruined my life," she'd reportedly told him. "I lost my home, my partner, everything. And for what? For you? You're not worth it. You never were." Marvin, Vivian learned, had moved into a small apartment across town. His reputation had taken a hit, too. In their social circle, word had spread about what he'd done. Physical therapy was a field built on trust, and being known as a liar and a cheater didn't help business. Several of his longtime patients had switched to other therapists. Vivian should have felt satisfied by this. Sweet revenge, karma coming full circle. But mostly, she just felt tired. Tired of thinking about Marvin, tired of analyzing what had gone wrong, tired of replaying the past. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, something unexpected happened. Vivian came home from work one Saturday afternoon to find a moving truck at Brianna's old house. New neighbors were moving in. She watched curiously from her window as an older couple directed the movers, a man with silver hair and a woman with a warm, gentle face. A few days later, the woman knocked on Vivian's door. She was in her early 70s, Vivian guessed, with kind eyes and a bright smile. "Hello, I'm Christina Foster," she said cheerfully. "My husband Arnold and I just moved in next door. I wanted to come by and introduce myself. I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all," Vivian said, feeling an unexpected warmth toward this friendly stranger. "I'm Vivian Donovan. Please, come in." They sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where so much had happened. But now it felt different, clean, new. Christina chatted easily about their move, how they'd sold their big house in the city to be closer to their grandchildren who lived one town over. "We're so excited to have a fresh start," Christina said, accepting the coffee Vivian offered. "After Arnold retired, we realized we wanted a quieter life. A neighborhood like this, with friendly neighbors, is exactly what we were hoping for." Vivian found herself genuinely enjoying Christina's company. There was something calming about her presence, something steady and real. Over the next few weeks, Christina would wave whenever she saw Vivian, would bring over homemade cookies, would chat over the fence while they both worked in their gardens. It was Christina who first noticed when Vivian started taking ceramics classes on Thursday evenings. "Oh, how wonderful!" she'd exclaimed, when she saw Vivian carrying a misshapen bowl to her car one evening. "I've always wanted to try that." "Is it difficult?" "It's harder than it looks," Vivian admitted, laughing. "But it's therapeutic. There's something satisfying about creating something with your own hands, even if it's imperfect." That conversation led to Vivian mentioning other changes she'd been making. She'd painted the living room walls a vibrant turquoise blue that Marvin would have hated, but that she absolutely loved. She'd adopted an orange cat from the local shelter and named him Latte because of his coffee-colored eyes. She'd started taking long walks in the evenings, discovering parts of her neighborhood she'd never explored before. "It sounds like you're really blooming," Christina said warmly one afternoon as they both worked in their gardens. "Building a life that's truly yours." Vivian paused, her hands in the dirt, considering those words. Was that what she was doing? Building a life that was truly hers. "I suppose I am," she said slowly. "I went through a divorce recently. It was difficult, but necessary." Christina nodded understandingly. "I'm sorry you went through that, but sometimes the end of one thing is the beginning of something better." That evening, Vivian thought about Christina's words. 6 months ago, she would have said that divorce was her worst nightmare. The end of her marriage, the destruction of the life she'd built, the humiliation of being betrayed. But now, sitting in her living room with Latte purring on her lap, looking at the turquoise walls she'd chosen just because she liked them, she realized something profound. She was happy. Not the carefree, naive happiness she'd had before. Not the happiness built on trust that turned out to be misplaced, but a deeper, more solid happiness. The happiness of knowing herself, of trusting her own judgment, of not needing anyone else's validation to feel whole. She thought about that day in the parking lot, when she'd broken down completely, how she'd sobbed and hit the steering wheel and felt like her world was ending. That woman seemed like a stranger now. That woman had still been fighting to hold on to something that was already gone, fighting to make a liar tell the truth, fighting to save a marriage that wasn't worth saving. But she wasn't that woman anymore. The woman she was now knew her own worth, knew that intuition wasn't paranoia, that self-trust wasn't a flaw, that choosing yourself over a relationship wasn't selfish, it was survival. She'd learned the difference between the man Marvin pretended to be and the man he actually was. And she'd learned that when someone tries to make you doubt your own reality, the problem isn't your perception, it's their deception. One Saturday morning in late spring, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Vivian was on her back porch reading when her phone buzzed with a text from Christina. "Arnold and I are making carrot cake this morning. Would you like to join us for coffee this afternoon? Around 4 o'clock? Bring Latte if you'd like. Our grandchildren are visiting, and they'd love to meet him." Vivian smiled and typed back, "I'd love to. See you at 4. No. She spent the rest of the morning working on a new pottery project, a bowl with deliberately uneven edges that somehow looked beautiful precisely because of its imperfections. She thought there was probably a metaphor there somewhere, but she didn't need to analyze it. She could just appreciate it for what it was. At 3:45, she put Latte in his carrier, grabbed a bottle of wine she'd picked up earlier that week, and walked next door. The afternoon was beautiful, warm with a gentle breeze, the kind of day that felt full of possibility. Christina answered the door wearing a floral apron and a huge smile. "Vivian, come in, come in. And oh, this must be Latte. Aren't you handsome?" Inside, the house was filled with the warm scent of freshly baked cake and the sound of children's laughter. Arnold was in the living room with 2 young grandchildren, a boy and a girl who looked about 8 and 6. They squealed with delight when they saw Latte. "Can we pet him?" the little girl asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Of course," Vivian said, opening the carrier. "He loves children." For the next hour, Vivian sat with Christina and Arnold, drinking coffee and eating the best carrot cake she'd ever tasted, while the children played with Latte in the corner. They talked about everything and nothing. Christina's daughter, who was a teacher, Arnold's collection of vintage records, the new Italian restaurant that had opened downtown, the community garden project some neighbors were starting. Normal things, easy things, the comfortable conversation of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company with no hidden agendas, no manipulation, no lies lurking beneath the surface. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting golden light across the room, Vivian felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Complete, genuine peace. She looked around at this scene, at these kind people who had become her friends, at the children giggling as Latte chased a toy mouse across the floor, at the half-eaten cake on the table, and the coffee cups, and the warmth of simple human connection. And she thought about where she'd been 6 months ago, about the cameras, about the parking lot breakdown, about the confrontation in her kitchen, about watching her marriage explode in real time. All of that pain had led her here, to this moment, to this version of herself who could sit in a neighbor's house and feel genuinely happy without needing a partner to validate that happiness, to this version of herself who trusted her own instincts without question, to this version of herself who knew with absolute certainty that she would never again let anyone make her doubt her own reality. "Vivian?" Christina's voice broke through her thoughts. "You have the most beautiful smile right now. What are you thinking about?" Vivian looked at her new friend, this woman who represented everything fresh and good in her new life. "I was just thinking," she said honestly, "about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best thing. 6 months ago, my life fell apart. But now, sitting here with you all, I realize I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Christina reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's beautiful, dear. You know what I always say? The universe has a funny way of clearing out what's not meant for you to make room for what is." Arnold raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said warmly. "To new beginnings," Vivian echoed, raising her own cup. As she left Christina and Arnold's house that evening, Latte sleepy in his carrier and the taste of carrot cake still sweet on her tongue, Vivian paused in her own front yard. She looked at her house, her home, truly hers now in every sense of the word. She looked at the garden where the camera had been hidden in the flower pot, that tiny piece of technology that had finally revealed the truth she'd been searching for. She thought about pulling out her phone and checking social media, maybe seeing if there were any updates about Marvin or Brianna, but she didn't, because she realized with startling clarity that she didn't care anymore. Their story was over. Theirs, not hers. Her story was still being written, and it was going to be so much better than the one she'd thought she was living before. Vivian went inside, fed Latte, and made herself a light dinner. She ate on her back porch, watching the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Later, she would work on her pottery project. Maybe she'd read the new book she'd picked up from the library. Maybe she'd call her sister and catch up. Maybe she'd just sit with Latte and enjoy the quiet. The possibilities felt endless in a way they never had when she was married. Back then, her evenings had been predictable, comfortable in their routine, but ultimately constrained by what Marvin wanted, what Marvin liked, what worked for their marriage. Now, every evening was hers to fill however she chose. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Vivian found herself thinking about that phrase that had guided her through everything. Female intuition never fails. She'd doubted it at times. She'd questioned herself, let Marvin's manipulation make her uncertain. But in the end, that intuition had been her lifeline, her truth, her salvation. She made a silent promise to herself, sitting there under the emerging stars with her cat beside her and her whole future ahead of her. She promised that she would never doubt that voice again, never let anyone convince her that what she knew to be true was paranoia or insecurity or overreaction. She would trust herself completely and without reservation, for the rest of her life. Because the truth was this: she hadn't been saved by the cameras, though they'd provided the evidence. She hadn't been saved by the flower pot, though it had perfectly positioned that crucial third camera. She'd been saved by her own refusal to accept the lies, by her determination to seek the truth, even when it was painful, by her willingness to trust her instincts over her husband's gaslighting. She'd saved herself, and sitting there in the peaceful darkness of her own backyard, in the home that was truly hers, with a life full of possibility stretching out before her, Vivian Donovan smiled. Not the cold, satisfied smile of revenge from that terrible night 6 months ago, but a real smile, a happy smile, the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but stronger. Female intuition never fails, she whispered to the night sky, to Latte, to herself, and a flower pot proved it. She went inside, locked the door behind her, and settled in for the evening. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new joys. But tonight, she simply existed in the peaceful certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. For the first time in her adult life, she was complete on her own. Not because she'd never loved, but because she'd learned the difference between real love and elaborate deception. Not because she'd never been hurt, but because she'd found the strength to choose herself when it mattered most. Not because she'd never trusted, but because she'd learned to trust the one person who would never betray her, herself. And that, Vivian realized, as she curled up on her turquoise couch with Latte purring contentedly beside her, was the greatest gift her terrible marriage could have given her. It had taught her who she truly was, beneath all the compromise and accommodation and self-doubt. It had forced her to find a strength she didn't know she possessed. It had shown her that she could survive the worst betrayal and come out not just okay, but genuinely, authentically happy. Months later, when people would ask her how she was doing, they'd expect sadness or anger or bitterness. Instead, they'd see a woman who glowed with quiet confidence, a woman who spoke with certainty about her own worth, a woman who had looked into the darkness and found her own light. "I'm doing wonderful," she would tell them honestly. "I'm doing better than I ever thought possible." And she meant it, every single word. Because sometimes the end of everything you thought you wanted is the beginning of everything you truly needed. Sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the best transformation. Sometimes losing someone who didn't deserve you means finding yourself. And sometimes all it takes is trusting your intuition, even when everyone around you says you're wrong, even when the person you love most tells you you're crazy, even when giving up would be easier than searching for truth. Female intuition never fails, and Vivian Donovan would never doubt hers again. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.